walk-in meetings at those. And we sponsor one of the races, and we call it, the running of the Silver Blaze, and it's, a whole thing. I remember I was an undergrad and my parents called me and they're like, "Where are you?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm here at the horse races, betting on the horse races." And I was an undergrad, and they're like, "Please don't gamble away your house."
Yeah. No, they do that, and they've done them in England too at the Wessex Cup. They've done as well, the Sherlockian Society over there. We have not started early. I just thought anybody who's just arriving now, I thought instead of playing the storm effects today, I would just, because it's the last show, I'd just chat with our co-hosts as they arrived, and chat with you too if you have questions or anything. You can throw it in the chat or in the Q&A. Here comes Mary. Hi, Mary. Mary, we're actually live right away. I decided we would all just chat before I started the show at the top of the hour. So people are watching us, just so you know.
Oh, okay. Amazing. Cool. Hello, everyone.
And Bob has a question for you, Dan. Are you appearing in any productions in Philadelphia in the future?
A lot of shows back in Philadelphia have not been announced yet. I think that theaters are beginning to tiptoe kind of gently back into producing. I know that some theaters are getting ready to announce seasons, but I can say with certainty, while I might have had a couple of conversations, there are no shows booked on my roster for any time in the upcoming future.
Okay.
COVID still got us all on the ropes.
Adam's asking me about a favorite or the best Bronte biography gearing up for Sundays with Jane Eyre. Yeah, Adam, I probably will post something about that soon. I'll be posting on the Sundays with Jane Eyre Facebook page with some Jane stuff. I've already started posting about, editions of Jane Eyre, that kind of thing. So I'll fill that in then. We're just waiting for Lauren, not Laura, but Lauren. Hey, everybody. We just decided we were going to chat a little. If you're just joining us, we're just chatting a little before we start the show in just about a minute. Instead of playing those storm effects that I usually play leading in, I thought we'd have a little chat here. Just looking through the chat, which is already too busy for me to keep up with.
Ed, your sound went out. We can't hear you. Now you're muted. And whoever.
There we go. How's that? Good.
In the chat.
I don't know what happened.
Somebody in the chat suggested lip reading. I was like, sorry, I can't. I'm not a spy. I can't do that one.
It just did that on its own. I don't know what the heck happened there. I literally didn't touch anything. So it just gave me the message, your mic's not working. So that's okay today because you guys are going to do all the talking. Well, we're still waiting for Lauren, but I am going to run the credits. So here we go, everyone, and we will begin the show now.
Going great.
dreary night of November. Welcome, Franken readers, to Sundays with Frankenstein. Farewell, I leave you, and in you the last of humankind whom these eyes will ever behold. Farewell, Frankenstein. He sprung from the cabin window as he said this upon the ice raft which lay close to the vessel. He was soon borne away by the waves and lost in darkness and distance. Franken readers, this is the final episode of Sundays with Frankenstein. Today, we're going to have an after party to wrap up the entire novel. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach in Philadelphia. And joining me today are all the co-hosts from this series. Actor and collector Dan Hodge. Dan, hello.
Hi, how are you, Ed?
That was an almost Vulcan salute there.
Yeah, I was waiting for the...
Science fiction scholar Dr. Anastasia Klimchenstein.
Yeah, I'm gonna try very hard, but my fingers don't.
All these years of Trekkie, and you have a hard time with that. How about that? Gothic scholar and one half of the Ghoul Guides, Mary Going. Hi, Mary.
Hi, and yeah, there we go.
Good. All righty. And also from the Ghoul Guides, the brilliant Dr. Lauren Nixon. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, Lauren.
Hi.
Great to have you guys here today. It is a party, so obviously I had to have a special drink, and it's not a Tamworth Art in the Age drink today. I just thought I would do my own, as I'm so grateful they helped me out with all the drinks. But today's a champagne cocktail with, I don't know if you could see it there. There's a pear slice in there and sugar, because this is because I thought a champagne cocktail would be good for the celebratory drink, and it is a little pear brandy over sugar. I actually take the slice of pear and I put it in sugar, and then I put it in there, a little pear brandy, and then it's champagne. And the pear brandy is actually a thing that's very big in Switzerland, and there's several Swiss distilleries that make pear brandy. So I thought that would be appropriate for this novel. And I thought first I was going to call a drink the Ernest Frankenstein, because I feel bad for Ernest, because he's just forgotten and left to his own devices. And then, but in the end,
I'm sure he ends up left in a handbag somewhere in a train station.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. I want to ask you guys about Ernest a little later, but I thought I would call the drink, this is the Margaret W. Seville I give you. So Robert Walton's sister, who he's writing the letters to, whom we owe this novel to if we're going to play the game with Frankenstein. And so thank you, Margaret W. Seville, for Frankenstein. We'll thank Mary Shelley later, don't worry. I wouldn't forget her. But I love how the initials match up to the Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, Margaret W. Seville. So but we're not just drinking here today. We're going to get right into it. We're also talking about Frankenstein. What we have done every week is dissect, anatomize, dismember, and bring back to life this book by Mary Shelley, chapter by chapter, page by page, word by word, as we create our very own conversational annotation of the entire novel. And in doing this, we at the Rosenbach ask you to support us, which you can do by donation. If you are not already a member, I would invite you to join. The basic membership level at the Rosenbach is even called the Mary Shelley level. And if anybody in the Zoom today, on our Zoom audience, has questions for the co-hosts or myself even, put it in the Q&A. We'll do our best to hit as many of them as possible. And fire away with questions. We were already answering a couple before the show even started. But I'm happy to not only answer questions myself, but I'm happy to have you ask questions of the co-hosts, and have them talk, because that's really what I want to do today. I mean, after I throw a little intro stuff here out there, I want you guys to talk and keep me as quiet as possible. I mean, I'll try. I mean, I'm not going to be quiet because we know that, but I will try not to talk as much as usual. First, for the audience, many of you guys have watched every show, and we've averaged on this show like 130, 150 range, which is really nice for a live audience. And then, you know, I don't know how many more hundreds are watching the videos as they exist out there now. But if you've watched every show, you gave us 33 hours of your life since January. And if you watch the other Frankenstein related programs we have, the Dave Gustin Talk, the Franken Cocktails, the Jen Summerfield and Josh Hitchens' Frankenstein films. Am I missing one? And the Frankenstein films that we did, that Dan and I did. If you watched all those, that's another 7 hours. So that's like a work week, 40 hours. You've given us a work week of your life in the last 3.5 months. And so I thank you for that. And I hope I made it enjoyable enough, along with our wonderful co-hosts. Plus there were 15 cocktails. So, you know, had I not been already pickled during the run of Sundays with Dracula with 28 cocktails, this must have put me over the limit. I don't know. Do I have a limit? We'll see. So all the recipes for the cocktails for Frankenstein, which were designed by our good friends at Tamworth Distilling and their shop in Philadelphia area, Art in the Age. All those recipes are posted along with the videos for each episode on our website. So, well, and I'll add the Margaret W. Seville, my own concoction, when we post this video. So we're going to get to you guys now. One thing I want to hit first is because Anastasia was on the last show with Les Klinger, which was great, right, Anastasia? So
yeah, that was great. Les is always wonderful.
I love having Les Klinger on. If people don't know, Les is the editor of the new annotated Frankenstein. He's also done tons of other editions. Like there it is. He's done a new annotated Dracula. We had him on for the Dracula show. He's very famous for being a Sherlockian along with Anastasia here. And he has a massive annotated Sherlock Holmes and several other annotated books. But it was wonderful to have him on, and I really liked it. We all got to talk about, the three of us got to talk about the end of this novel. But Mary, Lauren, Dan, you guys weren't here for the end, the very end. The creature comes in and talks to Walton, and Frankenstein dies. And I wanted to get your take, your thoughts on the end of Frankenstein, and especially considering I think Mary and Lauren might be a little closer to it, but let me start with Dan, because Dan, I know you're coming to it again after a long time. Yeah, and revisiting something where you're constantly in the film world, and now you're being faced with the novel again. And so how did this novel end for you this time, and especially compared to what you had remembered it to be like?
Well, you know, it's interesting. The end of the novel is actually one of the parts that I'm most familiar with, just because of what it is and how it lives in complete contrast to almost anything that's been done on film, with a couple of rare exceptions. It's actually the part of the novel that I've revisited perhaps the most. I went back, you know, you suggested that we look at the last two letters, and I went back and looked at the third forward to follow the death of Frankenstein himself. And you'll pardon the expression, but what a shitheel that guy is all the way to the end. Like, he's lying there dying, and he looks back across the scope of his life, and he literally says something to the effect of, "At least I didn't do anything wrong," or, you know, how he absolves himself of it. And yet here the being shows up and remonstrates himself for all of the things that he did. I mean, you kind of want to take one person's dialogue and put it into the other one's mouth, because it's just, you really want Frankenstein to repent on his deathbed for all of the misery that he's caused. And instead he's like, and when he tells Walton's men, like, "Are you going to be cowards and not go through to the end of your thing?" Like, he has learned nothing. Over the course of this entire novel, he has learned not a single damn thing. And here this creature shows up, and it's this wonderful thing that happens over and over again throughout the book. Like, Walton listens to him. This very, like, the way that the creature lays out all the stuff that's happened to him. And Walton's like, I was almost moved to pity. And then I saw how ugly he was. And I called him a wretch and said, I hoped he died. Like, it's so frustrating, frankly, Frankenstein-ly.
Mhm.
And then of course, yes.
Oh, I just wanted to say, I completely agree with you that nobody learns anything except maybe the creature. And it makes me wonder if that's what makes the story a tragedy in kind of a very classical sense of the word, in that everybody dies and nobody learns anything. There's no like growth. They're destroyed by their inability to sort of take stock of their situation and learn anything and move beyond it.
I mean, I think there's something interesting in that as a definition. I feel as though a lot of times when we talk about tragedy, most of my experiences with dramatic tragedy, and there's a big notion of needing to have that recognition near the end. And in fact, when scholars talk about a play like Macbeth, their big complaint about it is that he never sees the error of his ways. Whereas even in something like Othello, where he recognizes what brought him to this point and all these sort of things. So it's, tragedy is I don't think I've ever heard anyone refer to Frankenstein as a tragedy before.
I mean, yeah, I have read Aristotle and all of that other fun literary criticism, but I am not super obsessed with his definition of tragedy. I use the word in a very almost kind of colloquial sense, or in a way where I define it myself. And I think that there is something very tragic about a story in which so much goes wrong, and at the end nobody learns anything from it. Like, it's almost like the true tragedy is not just the all the deaths and all the horrors that happen, but also the kind of lack of growth that throughout this whole story.
Let me jump in just
It's
for a second.
an Elizabethan tragedy.
Yeah, let me just jump in there because you were misheard saying Frankensteinly, and someone thought you said Frankenstyling, and which is a great coinage. So I want everybody to start using Frankenstyling.
I'm Frankenstyling today. So.
There you go, Frankenstyling. That's when you're wearing your Sundays of Frankenstein shirt. So my whole family had theirs on today. Let me share that picture with everybody who, if you didn't see it on Facebook yet.
Please do, and then I can't wait.
Here we are.
This is Elizabethan tragedy.
It has been so great having not only my wife watch every week of the show, but the two youngest daughters. There's 5 daughters. These are the 2 youngest still at home, Sophie and Lulu. Sophie also did the editing for our credit sequences this year. But there we all are at our Sundays with Frankenstein t-shirts. The family that reads Frankenstein together is, I hope, okay for the future. So there we all are. So thank you, family, for watching the show and doing this. I hear them react sometimes. Sometimes I hear them react, like I hear cheers and laughter. And when I go downstairs every week after the show, they all wait for me. And as I walk down the steps, they all applaud. So they're so cute.
That's so wonderful.
So nice.
So,
that's adorable.
So my interruptions, my digression, because I like to do that. Dan talking about tragedy and Frankenstein and his reaction. Lauren, you were jumping in there before I jumped in myself.
Yeah, I think for me, it's very much an Elizabethan tragedy, in which, the Elizabethan tragedy is very much categorized by the fatal flaw. So unlike the Grecian tragedy, which is very much everything is set in motion, the stars define fate, the gods define fate, which is what the 1831 edition tries to do more. Mm-hmm. But the 1818 is an Elizabethan tragedy. There are all these opportunities, like Dan said, for Victor to learn, and he learns absolutely nothing. And you get that great speech from the creature where he says, "But I am a wretch. I have done these things." And I know last time when we were on, we talked about, I said like that I feel very much. You can feel sympathy for the creature despite the fact he's done all these terrible things, because he's never been able to properly learn reason and logic and good and evil. Like, he's had to learn in this way, and that's Victor's fault. So I think for me, the ending very much has that like intentional lack, which I think we've talked before about with this novel, which for me is very much because it's a post-war novel. I just think in these final pages, you cannot escape the disappointment that must have been felt in 1818, particularly because Shelley starts writing this in 1816. The sheer disappointment of Europe in 1816 must have been oppressing. To like travel to this nation where, you know, there's been war nonstop for 20 years. There was supposed to be this beautiful egalitarian dream. It was going to be the culmination of the Age of Enlightenment. It was going to be this wonderful, transformative time. And instead you got a dictator, you got hundreds of families losing sons and brothers, you've got countrysides absolutely ravaged.
The blood ran in the
and the Age of
streets during
Enlightenment
the
is
terror,
basically dead.
you know?
Literally, runs in the street.
Literally,
like
the blood runs
and like
in the streets.
Switzerland. Yeah, and Switzerland's an interesting place to set it, not just because they were there, but Switzerland and Holland are destroyed. You know? Like they're absolutely destroyed. So having this kind of ending where no one really learns anything, and you have that horrible recognition that terrible deeds cause more terrible deeds, and that is just a never-ending cycle. If Walton then pursues the creature, he just carries it on, and it's just that kind of horrid post-war grief for me that is like, oh my god, we haven't learned anything. Like there was all of this potential and all of this brilliance, particularly because Victor's a scientist, you know, and this is supposed to be the age of science and enlightenment, and then it just dies.
Yeah.
It just dies. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't go anywhere. It just dies. It's arrogant. It's full of itself. It never reaches its potential. And for me, those final lines as the creature swims away and Walton's kind of, you know, tone in the final letter, it's just this kind of heartbreaking, tragic post-war realization. And I think for me, that's what makes it so powerful.
Yeah. Take that, Age of Enlightenment. When did that phrase come about? Were they using that phrase yet, or is that something that later scholars have added to that age? Do we know when Age of Enlightenment?
I think at least in France they would call it l'âge des lumières, or
so they were. So it is an older term.
It was called and it's called like they often refer to the Enlightenment or enlightened thinking. We use it more contemporary, but it comes directly from salon culture, and the kind of like progressive salon education that
and
was
this
kind of
novel
happening.
Of course doesn't end in light. It ends in lost, in darkness and distance.
Well, technically it ends in a fire, which is light, or it's going to. It's well, I mean, so the creature disappears into the darkness, which, you know, we use darkness as a metaphor for just kind of lack of knowing, superstition, backwardness, all of those things. And then light is often a metaphor for knowledge. So the creature disappears off into the darkness, but he says there's going to be this, you know, great big fire. It's this very interesting juxtaposition that I'd have to think about what to make of that.
I love the irony, which I didn't point out last week, of the creature tells Walton that I'm going to go to the northernmost parts of the earth. That's exactly what Walton's trying to do and has failed to do. And the creature's like, yeah, I'm just going to go there. Don't worry about it. I'll find the North Pole. Nobody has to know about it. So that's what happens at the end. Mary, how do you react to the end of this novel? As depressing as we all see it. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think especially the interaction with Walton and Victor and Walton and the creature, it really reveals a lot about where you fall on the kind of monstrosity creature spectrum that I bring up, because I think it's really interesting. You know, do we view the creature as a monster? I would argue that we shouldn't necessarily view him as a monster, although he has done monstrous acts. And you know, as we've discussed, he acknowledges that I've done terrible things, and to some extent he's sorry about that. Whereas with Victor, there's, you know, no acknowledgement that, you know, he's done anything bad at all. And talking to Walton and kind of encouraging him to carry on this kind of mission to the death in the ice killing all, potentially killing all of the lives of the sailors that are with him, is just showing you that he has learned nothing and that he is just incredibly selfish. And I think I remember an early conversation that you had, Ed, with Dan, and you were talking about how we view the creature and do we view him as a human. And I thought that was really interesting, and it made me think, because I don't think I would view the creature as human, but I think that in our kind of 21st century context, especially post Buffy, especially post Twilight, especially with all these kinds of like YA like fiction, we're used to the idea of like others, supernatural creatures, monsters, vampires, werewolves, an array and any sort of supernatural creatures being other, but that otherness doesn't necessarily mean that they're monstrous or monsters, and that their monstrosity doesn't derive from their kind of supernatural otherness or their physical otherness, but they're different to humans, they're other. So I think our kind of understanding of individuals, whether that be monsters or others or any kind of thing, it would be different from even like a 20th century understanding of that kind of categorization. And I think this scene is especially the last kinds of interactions that you get in letters really encapsulates that, and how we kind of feel about the creature and Victor and that whole kind of spectrum of identity.
It's kind of what we would call now in academic terms post-human, where we're not necessarily talking about monstrous as the non-human other, but like something. And even the thing about, well, I'm just going to go to the North Pole, like the creature is post-human, like he's almost potentially better than human, but Victor makes him monstrous, society makes him monstrous. And I think that is obviously definitely a commentary about the evolving society and the romantic pushback against Enlightenment. But yeah, I guess we could kind of, that's quite a new academic concept, but I think we could probably apply it like retroactively to the creature.
And he's a new species. He's a new species. Victor says he wanted to create a new species that would see him as kind of God, and the creator. And so there is a difference. There is a distance. It is, like you say, post-human is a great way to describe that and define the creature.
I like how you use the word distance there too, and that's one of the words that we end with in the novel. So darkness.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned in an earlier show this, concept of the great chain of being, which was big in the 18th century, sort of every creature in its place, humanity is kind of in the mid center, and then there's angels and God above you, and creature, animals below you, and Victor creating this new creature that acts and thinks and talks like a human and is in a lot of ways stronger and better than a human, but he also isn't human. I mean, that's just throwing that whole logic, that whole framework out the window in a way that I think would have been a lot more uncomfortable 2 years ago than it is for us now. I think now we're very used to reading Frankenstein as the origin of this kind of post-human thinking, Lauren, that you're talking about, that these days comes up a lot with things like artificial intelligence. We have AI narratives are very, very common in our day and age, and often they're traced to Frankenstein and all of the ethical questions that this novel raises.
I mean, pushing it.
Kathleen Hudson has done some work about the AI in Blade Runner 2049 and linking it back to Frankenstein. I think we don't always realize kind of how closely connected it is, which just shows how good it is, to be honest. 200 years later, and we're
even
still...
the first Blade Runner movie too. As a matter of fact, I remember
so
in
much
school,
so.
when I had a Frankenstein course many years ago, part of the course we watched Blade Runner and read Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. But the movie, more so than Dick's novel, I think, really keys in on this concept of a new race, new beings, how human are they? So good stuff. Dan, you were going to jump in there with something?
I mean, I feel like to a degree we're steeped in it right now. When you think about and of course because this is my window into a lot of this. And I'm not a comic book guy at all, but so much of what's happening in pop culture right now, so many of the movies that are being put out to us, it's all superhero stuff, sequels upon sequels upon sequels. And it is these movies and this form of entertainment, television shows, all of it, focuses around characters who are superhuman, who exist in a world where they have human attributes, but arguably are not. And of course, that's something, it's really interesting to watch the societal shift, the culture shift, where people identify with them, where these characters become allegories for people who are shut out of everyday life, which traces its way back to Frankenstein. And I find in my experience that like younger folks get really tied up in the question of humanity versus inhumanity. You know, almost 10 years ago now, I directed a production of The Tempest, and I took the play at its word, and Caliban, if you follow the text, is the child of a witch and a devil. So I made him, for all intents and purposes, if you will, a monster. And he thereby exists outside of morality because morality is something that humans invented. A hamster doesn't eat its babies because it's evil. A hamster eats its babies because it's a hamster, you know? Yeah. And so we have this notion that Caliban is essentially a dog who can speak. And that made people furious because of the colonial implications of what The Tempest is. And, you know, people start to read it through a 21st century lens, and you have to say, no, that's not what the story is. And I feel like that's a question that's gotten muddier and muddier and muddier the further we go down the line of accepting our heroes and stories as being both human and inhuman at the same time.
I'm so bummed I didn't see you as Caliban. So
it wasn't me. It was Robert
superheroes.
Oh, okay. It was you were directing it then.
I directed. Yeah.
I mean, with superheroes, it's. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of discussing the whole.
My gosh, that's a whole show, isn't it?
Yeah. But superheroes are so interesting because we really are seeing this huge resurgence of the superhero story, and I'm sure there's scholarship on just why. And superheroes are this interesting category where they're stronger and better in certain physical ways than the average human being. They have powers, but the way that a lot of these stories are told, they're also othered in a lot of ways. I mean, especially if you look at the Netflix shows. I mean, Jessica Jones, that entire show is about her having PTSD. Matt Murdock is, a blind man. Tony Stark also has, all of these issues with PT. Like they're other in so many ways, and that otherness in some ways privileges them, like super strength or whatever, but in a lot of ways also kind of marginalizes them. And I think that's a very interesting thing that's going on in a lot of the narratives that we have right now.
Just while we're on here, I'll just show everyone my Deadpool poster, because I think.
Wait, where was that? So go up again.
That's a poster of Deadpool.
Oh, Deadpool! Awesome.
Yeah. That actually isn't mine. It came with the flat. But yeah, just Deadpool actually really.
Wait! You moved into a place and there was a Deadpool picture hanging, and it was already there. That's awesome.
Yeah, and actually, I was so distracted by the Deadpool poster that I asked the letting agent, "Does that poster come with the flat?" And forgot to ask, "Is there a washing machine in the flat?" And had to email later and double check that it did. But yeah, Deadpool and like you say, so many other superheroes encapsulate that idea and the many kinds of different ways of being othered, whether it's from that origin story of being created specifically for this purpose, or from having a kind of ability or a kind of physical manifestation that either reveals them as being other in a way that we societal norms dictate as being ugly or not desirable, or in a kind of powerful way, I guess the Scarlet Witch being so powerful, and those kinds of things. Although this is a massive kind of superhero rabbit hole, I guess we probably shouldn't go down, but it's really interesting to consider alongside Frankenstein.
It is, but let's take it to my
I do actually talk about Valperga when I talk about Captain America, so it's kind of on track.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, I haven't published it yet, but I gave a paper a few years ago about PTSD manifesting as a Gothic entity in contemporary Gothic soldiers, and I used Captain America the Winter Soldier as one of my examples. So I
Was
talked about like
supernatural another of your examples?
I love that.
yeah. So
I
I talked about how soldiers kind of post-war are really kind of they're unsustainable, and used Mary Shelley's kind of scathing take on military masculinity as my jumping off point. So it's kind of on topic.
Questions are piling up here in the Q&A, and I want to hit this little one first from Mary from Darla. Very important question, saved until the end here. My partner Paul has been wondering for months why Sam is missing from your supernatural backup dancers.
Okay. So I spent a lot of the kind of first lockdown on my own, and I don't know, I guess I went a little bit delusional, and then my flatmate came back and convinced me that yes, we need a giant cutout of Supernatural. So I bought Dean. So I only had one, and then for my birthday, my brother got me another one. So Sam is not there because I haven't bought it yet, and no one has gifted it to me.
That's it.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to rush out to get Sam, but if anyone would like to gift me the Sam cutout to complete the set, then do.
Put your address in the chat and we can do a fundraiser, the entire like Sundays of Frankenstein gang.
Also, the whole reason why I'm obsessed with cutouts is because when I organized the Buffy conference, Buffy in the Bible in 2018, our keynote brought his Buffy cutouts of Buffy and Angel, and I've never been so jealous of anything in my life, to the point that I went home and Googled how to buy, where I can buy them, and they're just not made anymore, and I've just been like really sad ever since. So then it didn't take a lot of convincing to buy a Supernatural one, but yeah, I guess that's another shout out. If anyone wants to gift me a Buffy cutout,
your mum and dad are in the chat, right?
Yeah, there you go, mom and dad.
This is a really elaborate way of asking your parents to buy you another cutout.
Thank you.
Maybe if you bring them to another conference to organize, you can, write it off as a research expense.
Yeah,
like I need them as a visual aid for my conference presentation.
Ooh, look at you. Lauren, you're in a new place today. Lauren's in a new spot today. She doesn't have Gorman guest, Reverend Peef hanging over her. So.
Yeah, so I have a confession to make. I'm in a caravan on the Great British seaside.
Wow, nice.
Because
is that nice? You're having a little vacation there? That's great.
Yes, we're having a little vacation, but the weather is really, really bad, and
it's usually so beautiful there. And
yeah, usually usually it's fine to do video calls and stuff from here, but we've had some fantastic stormy weather, which of course, because it's a bank holiday, we get the worst weather that we've had in a while. But yeah, we're having a little break.
I don't know, what's the holiday there now?
It's May Day. We're having
May Day
bank holiday.
Of course. Yes, and that's all weekend, so you get the Monday off.
Unfortunately, there is no dancing around the maypole, but fortunately no one's tried to put me in a wicker man, so pros and cons.
You won the lottery on that one.
There you go. Well, it's not over yet, so you still have the rest of the day. So sunset is the best time. I guess you're in the evening, so yeah, you're good. You've probably made it through. So
I'll probably fight. As long as we stream until 9 bang on, I'm probably safe.
No ritual burning. That's good. I'm not in favor of ritual burning of people. So Hamed asked us a question earlier. I'm very curious which of our hosts absolves the creature of his sins, and if any think it's sympathy for the devil to forgive him for killing innocents. So
I absolve the creature of everything he's done, just because I really dislike Victor, but also like I think that there is a way that we can read this as being sympathetic of the creature and understanding. I guess especially if you read Frankenstein alongside contemporaneous accounts of slave revolts, that were taking place in the Caribbean, Haiti, for example. I think we can understand that what the creature has done is monstrous, but also understand the context and the environment that he's working in. And he does show some kind of remorse. And I get, I don't know about the rest of the co-hosts, but I feel that, if circumstances were different, I guess this is where the nature nurture thing comes in, or if even there'd just been one person who had shown him, friendship, love, affection, kindness, that maybe he would have been on a different path. But because of the kind of the absence of that kind of familial love, parental love, and any kind of duty given to him by Victor, it kind of set in motion the creature going on this kind of inevitable murdery path. But yeah, I absolve him.
I think I do.
Wow, okay.
Anastasia's not ready to absolve him, I don't think.
I mean,
so here's the thing. Like, what he does is terrible, and you cannot forgive him of his crimes necessarily. But I guess, kind of like Mary was saying, like, I read it very much as part of the tragedy. So, in 1794, we have Mysteries of Udolpho by Radcliffe, and she kind of presents us with this hero called Valancourt, who is an absolute wet blanket. I cannot stand him. He's terrible. But she presents him basically as a very perfect soul, as this very sentimental, very feeling, very noble soul. And the way that the novel basically works is, because he's the second son of this family, his brother decides to send him off to join the army because he thinks that's a good way for him to make money. He then ends up having to go with his regiment to Paris, and whilst in Paris, they trick him, they convince him to gamble, and nobody helps him. He's basically drawn into this corrupt, extravagant Parisian society, and he almost ruins himself. And the only reason that he's restored is because he's in love with Emily, the heroine, and she kind of brings him back to reality. And I think that Shelley is kind of drawing on that notion of, do you see what you are doing to these noble, kind souls? And I think that it's just, again, a really condemning narrative on Victor, because, and this is kind of when we're starting to get that idea of education as a philosophical science. And education, there's lots of arguments at this point. I know we've talked about Rousseau before about whether or not, should education for young boys be harsh? Should they have to sleep on hard wooden beds and eat difficult food? And should they have to do all these things? Or should it be soft? And should it be given by women? And, what should education be? And I kind of see him very much as the victim. That doesn't mean that he's allowed to commit crime, but he kind of becomes that almost avenging angel type figure. Films like this are really popular at the moment. Things like Promising Young Woman. You don't agree with what I won't spoil it if people aren't aware of it. You don't support or agree with what the character does, but you can see how she is a product of the society and the culture that has driven her to do those things. And I think that's the kind of thing, maybe absolve is the wrong word. And I do think he is regretful at the end. And I do kind of think that makes him superior, maybe morally, to Victor. But I do feel like that's what she's trying to push us towards. You're look at what you're doing. Look at what all of this arrogance and warmongering and greed and lack of compassion. Look at what you're producing. You're producing people that think that the right thing to do is kill another person. You've told a whole generation of young men, you need to go over and kill a bunch of Frenchmen so they don't kill us first, and that's the way to solve the problem. So I think in context, I think it's supposed to make you think about what you think is okay, and question what you think, when is it, well, if this kind of killing is okay, why is this kind of killing okay? And women and children died in the war, villages got raided, people got, so why is it okay for that thing? I don't know necessarily that you're meant to be he was right to do those things, but I do think it's meant to make you kind of stop and think, oh my God, I don't support any of this. This is not the society that I want to be living in, the things I want to be producing. So I am on the creature's side here.
I mean, I think I agree with Lauren in some of the basic concepts, but also without kind of absolving or forgiving the creature, because he has done horrible things. He has committed crimes, and he does realize he can't plead insanity because he realizes exactly what he's done. But I do think you're right in that I also see it coming out of, a lot of the political philosophy of the Enlightenment of, how do we make a good functioning society with functional human beings who, don't hurt other people. And I think it's a very perceptive understanding on Mary Shelley's part that people who are ostracized, people who are cast out and othered by society are often driven to commit crimes through desperation, through just any number of things. And so, that does not mean that those people are not responsible for their actions. They are, and they absolutely should answer for them. But I think it's this understanding that, why people commit crimes, why people do bad things. It's not, it doesn't come from nowhere. It's a social question. It's a social problem where people are driven to it often by their circumstances, and those circumstances need to be addressed if we want to, again, have a functional society with functional human beings. And I think, as Lauren said, the revolution, the Napoleonic Wars, all that killing where, you're being told, you have to go out and kill these people. I think that definitely kind of going out and killing the people on the other side of the channel because they're on the other side of the channel is just like kind of not conducive to having a functional society and a functional, continent of people.
Yeah, it's like the first time that people are really properly considering the fact that war is not good enough. Like, that once you begin a war, you are always killing an innocent, because the people fighting the war either have been missold or believe it, or are just thinking, well, if I don't kill you, you're going to come and kill me. And, you had all of these stories coming out in Britain about the French revolutionaries ravaging towns and pillaging, and this is what's going to happen. And the campaigns were super, super bloody and brutal. This is the period where war becomes increasingly more brutal, particularly after Culloden in the mid 18th century, which was an absolutely horrifically brutal campaign, but it worked. So it was okay, and everyone celebrated it. And I think that's the thing. It's like, I think she's trying to make you question, like, well, who's innocent? Because from the creature's perspective, he's been wronged and these terrible things have been done to him. So in his logic, does that not make it then okay for Victor to suffer, and kind of vice versa? It kind of is that warped war logic of, yeah, don't kill like that, but kill like this, rather than maybe don't kill as a way to solve your problems.
It also feels like a very kind of antiquated classical logic, because that's what you get in classical myth and tragedy. You killed this person in my family, so now I have to go and kill all of the people in your family, who then have to go and avenge. And so many of the plays are like Aeschylus, Euripides, whatever, they're about that kind of like never-ending cycle of revenge. For example, Clytemnestra kills Agamemnon, and so his son has to kill Clytemnestra, and it's this big mess and big cycle.
Does anyone ever ask the question, do you absolve Clytemnestra? Do you absolve like these other classical tragedians and even Shakespearean tragedy? Does anybody have to absolve, Othello because, for killing Desdemona because he was tricked? I rarely hear that question asked about those other kinds of tragedies, but I frequently hear it asked about this novel.
Well, I think with Greek tragedy, there is an aspect of gender there. I mean, Clytemnestra was mad because Agamemnon sacrificed her, like their daughter, to go to war. for 10 years and all of these other things, which I'm sure there have been kind of more modern feminist retellings of that story where she's made more compelling, but you know, the main texts would be like the main versions of that story we get are from people like, you know, Aeschylus and Euripides. But I'm sorry, Dan, you were saying something.
We were talking about the cycles of violence and how this goes in you know, Ed mentioned Shakespeare. One of my favorite Shakespeare plays is Titus Andronicus, and it's exclusively about cycles of revenge. You know, when the play begins, Titus sacrifices one of Tamara's sons for killing his sons in war, but her sons only kill his sons because of wars that go back. And the entire forward trajectory of that play is essentially vengeance for that murder. And people get killed and raped and maimed and all kinds of horrible stuff happens. And that play is about how cycles of violence have no beginning and no end. They just extend eternally in either direction.
I saw a version of that play in Philly at the Lantern Theater, and the amount of food coloring they used throughout that play, it was just, you know, I'm pretty sure that they didn't have a budget for anything else because it all went into like red food coloring or red paint.
Was that the Lantern or was that the Philly Shakespeare Theater?
No, it's the Lantern.
That was the Lantern one? Okay. Yeah, because there were two that happened not within that long periods of time. Lauren, you keep mentioning the war and the Napoleonic Wars that had happened, and actually the French Revolution first leading into that. But just a reminder, everybody, that Mary and Percy Shelley, that's where they honeymooned. They honeymooned in like the desolate, wastes of that war in Europe. The war ends and they elope, and they're going through that whole countryside and seeing the effect that war has had on all of these people. So it's not surprising to make that connection.
It's terrific. Like,
yeah,
it's, and I know I harp on because it's my thing, but I do think it's something that we haven't. My thing. I do think my thing is the desolation of war. I should have picked a nicer thing. But I do think it's something that we don't consider often enough with not just Frankenstein, but all of the Via Diodati connected literatures, that they are literally walking into this Europe that for most British people have not seen Europe except for to go to war in almost 20 years. Like, it was almost impossible.
It's like a generation,
Jane Austen's,
Yeah,
it's like a whole, well, this is the thing, like I talk about this when I talk about Pride and Prejudice. Girls like Lydia and Kitty have never known a world not at war. You had young girls who had been born, grown, debuted in society, married and had a child in the space of that war. It's such a long period of time. So it's like before the revolution, it's this wonderful, Europe is this wonderful place of antiquity where young men go on the great tour, and it's full of learning and wonder. And then they arrive in 1816 and it's absolutely destroyed. You can't. Radcliffe talks about this midway through the period. She manages to go to Holland, and she writes in her commonplace book about, and in her travel writings, about the soldiers at the side of the road and the kind of violence. And then she writes Udolpho, which he just has all of these war-torn landscapes. And I just think you can't escape that when you're thinking about the moralistic elements of this novel. Because 20 years of war, and what does anybody have to show for it? Nothing. There's no, yes, there's progress. War always brings progress, but really, what did anyone have to show after that war finished? Pretty much nothing. And I think Shelley is so hypercritical of that. She hates that is the fact of this Europe that she can see. And really, considering how old she is, she's one of those women. She's one of those young women who has been born and lived, and only ever knowing this kind of long period of war with France.
And anytime you say born with Mary Shelley, and it's born out of her mother's death as well. This whole metaphorical, mythic, background of her life, that she feels, going through her life, really adds to that. there's a big question here from Sharon about what Mary Shelley wants us to learn from her story, but I'm gonna hold off on that one for a little bit. And this, there's a question from Robert here, which kind of I think hit a little earlier. We were talking about enlightenment and science, and I want to throw this to Anastasia. Does Mary Shelley see modern unfeeling science coming? And we're obviously going to use this for you to start to answer this, and then plug what's coming up with you.
Oh, I mean, I don't know if she sort of predicts the way that like industrialization will alienate the worker, and all of the spread of technology and science through the world will just kind of, you know, result in a world without kind of human ethical and moral interventions into science and technology. But I do think that she is writing on the kind of cusp of the Industrial Revolution. And, you know, we have to be clear here that the Industrial Revolution started in England in the late 18th century. In France, again, Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon was a lot more interested in like military applications of any kind of science and technology rather than like building factories or industrializing, or, you know, so in France it was a little delayed, but, you know, I think she's looking at kind of the cusp of industrialization and also all the other kind of scientific stuff that's happening, galvanism, etc. And, you know, while I don't think she's necessarily predicting kind of a horrible industrialized capitalist society of technological oppression, I think she is thinking about how, well, you know, we have all of this transforming world and all of this new stuff being invented and created, and we really need to keep the human element in it. You know, a lot of people say that Victor's big like problem is that he did what he should not have done, and he tried to play God and sought scientific secrets that he shouldn't seek. But his problem is not one of knowledge. Like, the problem is not that he discovers the secret of life. His problem is one of personal responsibility. So I've always read this text as more of a meditation on the responsibility of the scientist, where it's not the problem is not that you necessarily create something. The problem is what you do with it. And I think we see a lot of that kind of in our modern day world, where, for example, automation, machine learning, all of these technologies have taken off. We've automated everything from, you know, facial recognition, policing, even the sentencing of you know, people who have been convicted of crimes. But the problem is that we're realizing that a lot of the kind of engineers and programmers who are making this stuff, we haven't really taught them to think about the consequences of, say, automating things like credit checks or college admissions and how that like encodes bias. And I think that's the same thing here of she's seeing this kind of a changing world coming. I almost think of the way that Sherlock Holmes kind of in 1914 stands and looks out and he goes, there's an east wind coming, you know, suggesting there's change coming. It's going to be a completely new world. She's noticing a completely new world, and she's realizing in this new world that we're building that will be, you know, so different from what's come before. We have to really sit and think about what it's going to look like, what choices we're going to make, how we're going to, you know, act as ethical and moral beings in that world, and take responsibility for what we create.
I'm so happy you brought technology into that too, because that's how because that's how I see this question being answered. In a sense, it's like it's the technology that kind of creates that idea of, you know, impersonalization of people, and before I think science actually adopts that kind of idea, and that kind of comes in through with science. And
okay, well, I can go down a very quick rabbit hole, because I think what you're gesturing towards is the idea of objectivity, the idea that science should be objective. And what we mean by objectivity is the idea that we need to repress the self, like the human self, the kind of feeling, biased, emotional, sensible self, like that needs to be repressed, and only our reason and kind of our unbiased perceptions are what we should use to do science. So there's this great book on the history of objectivity by Lorraine Daston and Peter Gallison, which basically describes this, but that concept of objectivity as, this thing where you remove the human feeling self and you just have this kind of mechanical perception of the world. That's a 19th century, like that's an idea that emerges in the 19th century. That's a conception of science and objectivity that comes, with industrialization, and also with the advent of things like photography, where instead of, drawing something, you could photograph it. That was seen as more objective.
And this is the opposite of romanticism, which is that investment of the self and development of the self and all the biases that come with the self. And it's amazing that the romantic, the artists, especially the poets that we've talked about, they all love science. And I mean, science is so exciting for them. And yet how scientific endeavors develop over the 19th century is to take that emotional, take the Paracelsus, take, out, the Albertus Magnus out of science and make it this, very objective endeavor.
There's a great book, final thing I'll say on this, there's a great book by John Tresh, who was at the University of Pennsylvania. It's called The Romantic Machine. And he basically challenges this dichotomy that we really love to buy into, where the romantics were, interested in feeling and nature and emotion and subjectivity, which was in complete contrast to things like inorganic things, machines, kind of science, technology, industry. And he's saying, well, that dichotomy that we've established between the two, that was just completely false. And the romantics were really interested in machinery and technology and, all this other stuff. And he goes through and looks at like all the cultural production of 19th century France, early 19th century France, and says, well, actually this dichotomy completely breaks down.
Well, if anyone would like to know more about Frankenstein and how it is, ties in with science and is a science fiction novel, Dr. Anastasia Klimchinskaya is going to be teaching a virtual course for the Rosenbach, Frankenstein, Modern Science and Its Literary Lives. You can register for that now. It starts on June 21st. And then it's 4 sessions long. Then there's one July 12, July 26, and August 9. It is your summer Frankenstein course that you can take. Anastasia, you want to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, since I'm a science fiction scholar, what I look at is how science and technology intersect with culture. And so, of course, what interests me in Frankenstein is its intersections with the science and technology of the day. And during Sundays with Frankenstein, we've talked a lot about, sort of political philosophy and Paradise Lost and all of these other great things. But this course will give you a chance to delve a lot more into how Mary Shelley was responding to the science and the technology of her time, but also kind of the paradigms, the conceptual frameworks, the metaphysical questions that those scientific practices existed in. So, not just how Mary Shelley was responding to galvanism, but sort of what were the metaphysical and ontological stakes of the practice of galvanism, and how did they challenge, for example, existing ideas about the boundary between life and death. So we'll be looking at concrete scientific practices, but we'll also be looking much broader or much more broadly at sort of the context, the philosophy, the implications on a larger philosophical, cultural, kind of even political scale of those practices and how that gets incorporated into the novel.
Good. People have to take this course. I'm going to take it.
Really? Okay. You didn't tell me that actually, so I'll be really excited to have you, Ed.
Oh yeah, I'm absolutely. It's one of the joys of organizing courses for the Rosenbach is that I get to, sit in on the ones that I'd like to sit in on. And this is absolutely one that I want to sit in on. So we'll get to your other plug later for another event, but I wanted to hit that one now. I know Tucker Christine is in our audience, and I wanted to ask Tucker about the music for this show, and I'm going to bring him on in just a moment. I'm just giving you a heads up, Tucker, that I want to, I'm going to enable you to be promote you to panelist in just a moment. Let's hit one more question here. That's the big one. This one, I don't know if anybody may have something on, is that from Bob. Bob asks, any chance Mary Shelley was acquainted with the story of the Golem? Anybody know? I know that this, especially in the 18th century, this is a big story, and people are starting to become more aware of it, throughout, Western European culture. But I don't know if Mary Shelley was ever aware of these stories. So Mary, are you the one I'm going to hit, Mary, or is Lauren laughing because she knows Mary's going to go off on a Golem tangent here?
This is one of Mary's favorite topics.
I love golems. If you want, I can talk about golems for a little bit. Although I haven't found any evidence that Mary Shelley was acquainted with the golem myth.
Yeah, I haven't either. And I've looked that up, and I can't seem to find any connections. But the connection with the creature itself and what happens with that creature, describe that a little bit for people so they become aware of that.
Yeah, they're really interesting parallel kind of traditions that I think are really kind of meaty and interesting to kind of look at and compare. So the whole idea of the golem, if you go back to Genesis, Adam is created by the divine. He's created from clay or from dust by the divine, by God. So you have this idea. You have Rabbi Rava, who's one of the most cited rabbis in the Talmud, but he also apparently got into kind of Jewish mysticism, and this is kind of like the origin of Kabbalah. And he apparently made a golem and sent it to a fellow rabbi, and it has the same idea. So a golem you create from clay, but a golem isn't the same as humans, because they're not created by the divine. They're created by someone who is close to the divine. So not just anybody, but a rabbi. But there is that kind of distinction. So golems are often quite clunky. A lot of golems are mute in that kind of sense. They really took off in the kind of 16th century and the kind of medieval period, and specifically around like Poland, Prague, Germany, these kinds of Western kind of European countries. And this is where you get the legend of the Prague of the Golem of Prague. So you have someone, a Rabbi Judah Lowe, and he creates a golem, and he uses the golem, he activates the golem to kind of protect the Jewish community in Prague against anti-Semitic attacks. So golems are kind of entwined with kind of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, but also this idea of persecution and having something that the Jewish people can create to fight back against that persecution. And the idea, so you have this book, one of the earliest kind of Kabbalistic texts called the Sefer Yetzirah, which is also known as the Book of Creation. And this kind of is a kind of manual to create a golem, but it's not exactly kind of a step-by-step, this is how you would create a golem. But basically it says that you need to do a ritual, you need to be a rabbi, and you need to do this specific ritual where you use the Hebrew alphabet to create a Shem, which is the name of God. And you would create a kind of a word. So the most common word is kind of emet, E-M-E-T, which is stands for truth. And so in some, depending on like whatever version of the myth you're using, sometimes those letters are kind of written on the golem's forehead. or sometimes they're written on a scroll that's inserted into the golem's mouth. And then, depending on the tradition, sometimes you can add other stuff to the scroll to kind of change who kind of is in control of the golem. So maybe by changing some of the stuff on the scroll. But these letters and where you have it written on the golem are really important, because golems can be kind of activated and deactivated. So you'd often do that just by kind of removing a letter. So Emmet is E-M-E-T. If you take off the E and you're just left with M-E-T, M-E-T means death. So you'd either erase the E from the kind of forehead, or you'd take out the scroll and you'd scribble out E. And then the golem would kind of like, I guess be more of like a robot or something that's not switched on.
You can turn him off like Data.
Yeah, exactly. The whole thing about this legend of the golem in Prague and Rabbi Judah Loew is that he usually deactivated his golem over the Sabbath, because obviously the Sabbath is really important, and you need to kind of adhere to that and make sure you're not doing any work, and that includes the golem. But obviously one day he forgets to kind of deactivate his golem. Depending on the different legends that you have, the golem either kind of goes on a murderous rampage, and then Rabbi Judah Loew kind of catches up with him and deactivates him and then never turns him on again. Or sometimes he finds he falls in love with someone, or sometimes the Rabbi Judah Loew just kind of catches him in time before he does anything. But that idea of there being the potential for violence, I think, is a really interesting parallel with Frankenstein. And then I think I'll just quickly hit this. So there's a kind of a German silent film, I think it's from the 1920s, called Der Golem, which basically uses this kind of myth of Rabbi Judah Loew. And I think it has a lot of really interesting parallels with James Whale's 1931 Frankenstein. And especially, I remember when I watched this film, there's a moment in the Golem film, Der Golem, where there's an interaction between the Golem figure.
This is the silent film, the Paul Wegener film.
Yeah, exactly. And there's this really interesting interaction with the Golem and a child that you also see in James Whale's Frankenstein, which I think is just really interesting. And then if anyone is interested in Golem film recommendations, there is a 2018 horror film called The Golem, and it is created and directed by the Paz brothers, who are two Israeli film directors, and they call it the Jewish Frankenstein. It's a really interesting film. It's not for people that are squeamish. There's a lot of violence in it, but I love the film, and I can talk more about that if anyone's interested. But yeah, that is the kind of the Golem and the kind of the relationship with this kind of Frankenstein tradition.
I've just pulled up a picture of the silent Golem film here. And you mentioned with the child here, a little grainy, but this is this Golem figure. And
I think it's important to note that this film, the creators of the film weren't Jewish, and a lot of films produced in Germany at this time, and specifically that kind of the silent films, they were overtly anti-Semitic, and this is the same for this film. It is very, very explicitly anti-Semitic, but traditionally the Golem myth is it's a Jewish myth, and it's often the stories are created by Jewish people, and it's connected to those kinds of moments of persecution. So the Golem film by the Paz brothers is set in 17th century Lithuania. It's a beautiful period film, just a different kind of period film than I think we as kind of British and American audiences might be familiar with, but it's tied to that kind of Jewish persecution, where the Jewish community are basically accused of bringing the plague. And that's why the kind of golem is created in that story.
Dan, you know about this this connection with the whale 31, right? I mean, even the early makeup they did, but which we don't have pictures of, has been described as
I have seen a photograph in my time, and of course it's long enough ago I don't know if it's doctored, but back before both Whale and eventually Karloff were attached, they were going to make a movie. Lugosi was offered the part, and there is a photograph of his screen test in the makeup, and it's directly derived from the Golem makeup from the silent picture. So there's definitely a connection between the two.
Well, like Mary Shelley may not be connected, but clearly everybody reading Frankenstein or approaching it seems to connect these two creatures.
Yeah, and I think particularly
there's not a lot of evidence, but I think it's fair to say that it's possible, because we're talking about a period where folklore is again becoming really popular. There's a big Jewish diaspora at this point, as there still is, but big Jewish diaspora coming in. You have all of the emigres coming in from France. You know, there's a sudden explosion of like European culture in Britain at this point in time. And I think it's entirely possible.
Interesting.
That is something that Shelley would have been familiar with. It's just a shame that we can't say that for sure. But I think we can definitely conjecture that with some certainty.
I just brought Tucker in. Tucker, hello.
Hey, how you doing?
Great to see you. So,
you too, man.
For people who may have just joined us for Sundays with Frankenstein, Tucker was one of the co-hosts of Sundays with Dracula. He has this exceptionally wonderful Dracula collection himself, and has been reading Dracula since what, third grade? Was that the story?
Yeah, third grade.
Third grade. And but he's also an accomplished musician, and did not only the Storm into Whitby theme song for Sundays with Dracula, but he did the It's Alive theme song for Sundays. It's just so great, Tucker, that I get to do shows for the Rosenbach and with their own theme music for the shows.
Well, it was a lot of fun to do too. So I was glad when he asked me for the Dracula thing, and then I just offered up the Frankenstein one.
And that how did you put together this Frankenstein, this It's Alive theme, which we've all heard? Because I play the whole damn thing. I made a whole 2-minute credit sequence for the beginning of every show, and people were telling me, my wife was even telling me, you're supposed to do a short intro and then a long outro credits, and I'm like, yeah, but I want to do the whole song.
Well, if you remember when I did the first Dracula theme, it was only 30 seconds long, and that did not work.
Yeah, we needed a longer one.
Yeah.
So, but that one we used to just play on a loop before the show started over and over again. This one, though, we created a credit sequence for. How did you put together the It's Alive song, and what were you thinking when you did it? Because I think you probably had other musical cue influences in that song as well. Yeah,
well, I kind of suspected that you were doing Frankenstein when I started doing it, so I was kind of doing it specifically for you. And I really like the Don Banks soundtrack for Evil of Frankenstein.
It's a great soundtrack.
It's awesome. I think it's the best Frankenstein soundtrack.
Well, Hammer film.
I'm a big James Bernard fan, but I agree. Like
everyone, yeah. Evil of Frankenstein. And what's his name again? Don Banks.
So I modeled it after that. It's pretty much the same chord progression as his theme for Evil of Frankenstein. And I wanted it to kind of, if you listen to it, you can make up a story to go along with it. It tells a story as it goes through the theme in that 2 minutes that it goes by. But I also wanted it to be like controlled chaos. So the electric cues that go in the beginning are they're kind of in 3/4, even though the song is in 4/4. So it kind of confuses you when you go into it. And then when the guitar and the piano kick in at the end, they're playing against each other. They're not playing together. And there's no pattern when the stings come in. It's like the one sting comes in at 4, the one sting comes in at 3, the other one's at 6. So it's really, like I said, I wanted it to be controlled chaos.
It works for me. and that you talk about that controlled chaos, that really, it's something that now really rings true with me in hearing it. And there was some kind of discord thing in it that I knew was intentional, that I was like, there's something a little off here that works well, and I guess that's what it was that I didn't realize. So
there are times when I listen to it where I hear mistakes that I justify as saying are controlled chaos. But,
there you go. That's it. Yeah.
But the chaos was intentional also.
You did that on purpose. Well done. So I really love it. So I wanted to have you on and thank you and have you talk a little bit about that.
Are you doing the theme for Jane Eyre as well?
I haven't been asked, but
he hasn't been asked, and I have not. Like I always, feel, not guilty so much, but I feel like Tucker has given me so much.
I do have 2 or 3 possibilities in the works for you, Ed. But
all righty, there you go. We're gonna talk about it. So it's not that I haven't asked because I don't want it. It's because I would love to have it. So
I think I have something you might like, but it's tough with this one because I haven't read it. So I'm going.
So you would need some direct, and then I can provide you with direction on that and how,
there's a crazy woman in the attic. I think that's the major kind of theme of that book.
Mary, we go to Haworth again, and we will take pictures and we can make Tucker a mood board based on the pictures of them all. It will be a really difficult day for us, but we are willing to do that work.
It'll be hard. We'll have to sacrifice a lot, but we are willing to do that.
We might have to
make a mood board for you.
Well, let me take
to visit more than one tea room.
Let me take a moment then and talk about Jane Eyre for people that may not have heard exactly what we're doing next for our Sunday show, and it is going to be Sundays with Jane Eyre, and it will be another biblioventure, another deep dive into a book, 1 or 2 chapters a week. But because Jane Eyre is so long, I couldn't really, there's only so much cramming you can do. So it's going to be 30 weeks. It is going to begin on July 11th, and it is going to finish on January 30th. And then it'll meet every Sunday. There's 2 Sundays we're off. One of them is Halloween. I just thought that I'm probably going to want to do something else on Halloween. It's a big conflicting day here, and as things will be open again, it might be hard to do a show that day. But also, yeah, Dan, cross fingers.
Yeah, I'm knocking on wood here.
And then also on 12/26, on December 26th, the day after Christmas, we'll probably, instead of having a regular show, probably have a Jane Eyre Christmas party instead, which I think would be more fun than diving into the novel at that particular time. But we're going to, it's the same approach to Jane Eyre as we've done to these 2 novels. I'll have co-hosts every week, and those co-hosts won't be so much the set co-hosts that we've had for Dracula and Frankenstein. I'll have about maybe 12 to 15 different co-hosts over the whole run, and some of them will repeat and some of them won't. But 2 co-hosts who I will have, who will appear once a month, will be the Ghoul Guides, Dr. Lauren Nixon and Mary Going. You guys will join me again. You did for Dracula, Frankenstein. Now you'll be back on for Jane Eyre. I'll have you guys on at least once a month. And yeah, you'll be my connection with Haworth. Maybe you can get out there and do that. I've talked to the people at the Bronte Parsonage in Haworth, and they are interested in what we're doing, and hopefully we'll have more involvement from them as well in this next project. It will it'll be a lot of fun, just like we're doing this run. So there'll be some cocktails, but it won't be as cocktail specific every week as I think these last 2 novels have run. It'll be maybe sometimes I'll just have wine. Maybe sometimes I'll just have
Boozy tea.
So that would be nice. I might add something to my tea, but that's clearly not everyone is required.
Perhaps we should send you a selection of Yorkshire tea.
Oh,
The most appropriate drink for Jane Eyre would be Yorkshire tea.
Yes.
Which is the best tea, and I will accept no arguments. If you're drinking English breakfast, it has to be Yorkshire tea. But yeah, perhaps Mary and I can put together a little Yorkshire care package.
There you go.
Considering that I don't currently live there, but we literally live there.
That will be wonderful. I will absolutely love that. If people wondering what the Rosenbach connection is to, the Jane Eyre, as we've had a strong connection with Dracula, because we have Bram Stoker's Notes for Dracula, and then a growing vampire literature collection. Frankenstein, we have the first edition. We have Mary Shelley letters. We have other things related to the group of people that Mary Shelley knew. But for Jane Eyre, we have a first edition of Jane Eyre in our collection. We also have Lewis Carroll's own copy of the novel Jane Eyre, as well as his copy of Villette as well. We have a letter from Charlotte Bronte to her dear friend Ellen Nussey, which will be interesting to share, to see what she wrote to her. But most significantly, we have the manuscript in Charlotte Bronte's hand of the preface that she wrote for the second edition of Jane Eyre. And even signed, the manuscript is even signed Currer Bell, which was the pseudonym she published it under. So that'll be interesting to share as well. So Sundays with Jane Eyre is next. It is, as I described it last week, it's not quite a monster novel, or is it a monster novel?
Well, there is actually a connection, a Jane Eyre and Frankenstein connection. Do you want to hear what it is?
Shoot.
So obviously Frankenstein opens and closes in the Arctic, which was kind of, big in the British imagination at the time. And in the very beginning of Jane Eyre, on page 2, she's sitting in the library and on the sort of seat and reading this book called Berwick's Birds. I think it's Berwick's or Berwick's. But it's just basically very beautiful, expensive edition. It's a book of different birds, describes them and illustrates them. And there's a passage where she's reading about northern birds, the kind who live in sort of like Norway, Iceland, up to the north. And she's sitting there and thinking about these icy and northern climes and what it would be like to kind of go there, to be there, and how it just captures her imagination. So like Frankenstein, Jane Eyre opens with this kind of evocation of the north and the Arctic. So there's your connection.
Thank you. It is also, dare I say, a Gothic novel, is it not, Mary and Lauren?
Everything is a Gothic novel.
Yeah,
it is if we have our hands on it.
I mean, that'll be the question I have with you guys every time you're on, is how Gothic is it?
It's very Gothic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jane Eyre is a very beloved novel for me. I read it. I actually read it for the first time in a hotel in Yorkshire on the moors, and just picked it up by chance because I was about 11, and as 11-year-olds do, they are very inquisitive and want to read everything. And I think I'd finished my book too quickly, so I picked up Jane Eyre and was instantly very taken by it. But it is an incredible novel, and it's very Gothic. And
Wow.
I think Mary and I both also love its afterlife. So things like the Wide Sargasso Sea,
Yeah.
Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, we're both really big fans of that, and we always try to get a little bit of a Jane Eyre connection once a year on our Gothic reading group when we ran Sheffield Gothic.
That's a great story, reading it at 11 and on the Yorkshire moors for the first time. I want to hear more about that.
That's perfect. Yeah, it's a novel that's had, I think, so many afterlives. I mean, a lot of sort of Victorian 19th century British literature has had afterlives, but I think Jane Eyre specifically has ended up with a lot of very culturally significant afterlives. Actually just got a book via Book of the Month Club, which is apparently a modern day adaptation of Jane Eyre set in Florida of all places, which is called The Wife Upstairs. So I'm really excited to read that and see what they do with that, or what the author does with that.
Tucker, you're going to come along with the Jane Eyre ride with us, because that's not your novel, but like because of these biblioventure experiences you've had, are you so excited that like, all right, Ed, I'll read a chapter or two of Jane Eyre a week?
Absolutely.
Good.
I because of everything being open now, I probably won't be there live every week because I cater on weekends.
Yes, you'll be busy. Thank goodness.
Yeah. But actually, right now we're booking up, but it's not till end of summer, beginning of fall. So I should be there for a lot of it.
Good. I'm glad you can. Tucker, thank you for joining us. I'm going to drop you back into the audience. Before I do, anything to plug before I?
Just my Dracula Beyond Stoker website.
Dracula Beyond Stoker. Put that in the tell us about that a little bit. We were going to do a vampire thing about that, but we haven't been able to get to that yet. So tell everybody a little bit about your Dracula Beyond Stoker project.
So during the course of Sundays with Dracula, I started compiling a list of all the novels and short stories and children's books, and then I extended it to plays in which Dracula or the characters from the book or Bram Stoker as a vampire hunter appear.
You and I were both surprised by this. Like, there's so many Dracula bibliographies of all kinds of, but they're mostly film centric, but very few try to be complete about literary works.
And it's been really hard to put it together because they're not all obvious. I mean, like I'm reading one right now that's called A Talented Man. I found that by accident, you know. It's like it doesn't on the back of the book, it doesn't say anything about Dracula. The title doesn't say anything about Dracula. I just happened to read a review of it and I realized that it was about Dracula. It's about the writing of a sequel to the book. And I think I'm up to over 200 novels, like 170 short stories. I've paused children's books for now because that's ridiculous how many there are of them.
Drop that link in the chat for people here. We'll provide that. We'll put that on our Facebook group page, or you can put it on the put it on the Frankenstein group page too, so people watching this show can take a gander at that. And Tucker, thank you for the music for the show, for all the things that you've done for the Rosenbach. It's been absolutely wonderful, and I really appreciate it. So
and tomorrow is a year since Dracula started.
Tomorrow it is. It's May 3rd. The novel
goodness.
Starts. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah.
Wow.
It was a year ago
Oh my
tomorrow that we started our Sundays with Dracula run. And all those videos are on the Rosenbach website. They're on the Rosenbach's YouTube site too. So I feel like as Frankenstein ends, if you want something to do and you have not, and you were not there for Drac in the beginning, there you go. You can start watching the Sundays with Dracula videos. It's not like our meetings follow real time, because the novel just slows through time and jumps back, but the novel is 27 weeks and there are 27 chapters, and our meetings take that same time frame too. So you can watch Sundays with Dracula, which started on May 3rd in 2020. So thanks for the reminder.
Such an insane time, and you guys kept me sane.
Me too. Let me tell you. All right, Tucker, I'm going to drop you out of here. Thank you so much, buddy.
See you later.
And how do I move you out here? I think I got to go through this other way. Sorry. Where are you at? Oh, you're in panelists. I know. I feel like I'm still learning this technology, even though I've been doing it for, over a year now. I still am learning it every week.
I just got to say, sitting here with all these panelists, people who actually know like literature and have an idea of like how it ties into like historical significance, to have a guy step on and go, "Oh yeah, Don Banks wrote the score for The Evil of Frankenstein." I'm like, there's one. I know that reference. sitting here feeling like a dope for so long, and I go, no, I got this one.
Yeah.
You got the James Whale stuff, and what you were saying about that was really super interesting.
I'm not fishing for compliments now. Don't come. I just felt so excited from it.
And you guys, well, Anastasia accidentally jumped on one week when Mary and Lauren had not realized that we had moved our clocks forward an hour. But Dan, this is the first time you're with everybody, and so for the first time everybody together, does anybody have any questions you want to throw to another co-host that you would love to ask them? Please. This is an excuse for me just to smoke.
So many questions for Mary and Lauren that I don't even know where to start, but I'm always really curious about, this big 18th Enlightenment idea of the sublime and how that ties in with understandings of scientific practice at the time, because obviously this novel is very interested in the sublime and all of the mountains they go look at that Victor fails to be moved by. And I'm actually very curious what you make of the fact that Victor is looking at all of these sublime things, and he might as well be looking at a brick wall, like it does nothing for him. But also just that interesting contrast between the sublime is sort of feeling fear and awe of nature, and then Victor, who is trying to penetrate into nature's hiding places rather than just admiring.
So we actually have just filmed a Ghoul School episode because we're back to creating content. We've actually just filmed a Ghoul School episode where I will be taking 10 minutes to try and succinctly explain what the sublime actually is.
Boy.
So hopefully I will have that ready for you guys in like a week or two. But kind of just, to kind of put it briefly, the sublime.
And people can look up the Ghoul Guides on YouTube to find your Ghoul Guides YouTube channel to see that.
And I will share it in the Facebook groups when we're ready. But yeah, the idea of the sublime basically is the experience of witnessing greatness and power beyond the mortal. So it's often the idea of God in nature. But it essentially comes down to this idea of witnessing something that makes you conscious of your own mortality. And you get this a lot in romantic fiction, but also in Gothic fiction. The idea of the sublime essentially is what creates the terror. And I know Anastasia did a really great answer for you guys on Facebook about the death scene in Frankenstein, and about the difference between kind of horror and terror. And it essentially comes down to the sublime concept. And the sublime concept essentially is kind of, terror is a transformative experience, and therefore can be a transgressive experience. So terror is often what one feels when one witnesses the sublime. And what is supposed to happen when you witness the sublime is that you almost open, think of it like a third eye. You witness the sublime and you are transported to this realization that you are merely a mortal, that there is this unspeakable, unknowable beauty in the world, and with it comes great power. This becomes particularly important in the Enlightenment because we're thinking about science and we're thinking increasingly about things like evolution and development. We're not tied to this kind of old school Catholic concept of religion and nature. We're increasingly walking towards a more scientific concept, and this is obviously what the Enlightenment is all about. Victor's failure to be moved by the Enlightenment, by the sublime, is essentially a signpost that he fails to comprehend his place in the world. So the Gothic heroine or the Gothic hero feels the sublime very acutely. There are these fantastic moments in Radcliffe's novels, but in a lot of 18th century fiction where the heroine looks upon a scene and is transported by it. And in Radcliffe, it's the closest we ever come to the supernatural. Emily looks out on the Alps and she's so struck by the image that she feels that she can see the soldiers invading Rome. And she thinks she can see Hannibal's army, and it's such a clear imaginative image that she imagines she can see the sun glinting on their spears. So it's this kind of transportive experience. It terrifies you, but it also opens your mind. So it's supposed to be something very powerful. Victor, as a scientist, should be really in tune with the sublime. He should be using the sublime as the basis for his scientific pursuits, because this is really where that 19th century exploration comes from, is looking at the beauty and the magnificent of nature, of natural circumstances, of things we do not understand, and then pursuing an understanding of it, not out of our own arrogance, but out of our general betterment, the expansion of our minds for the improvement of our character. So this is why the Gothic heroine goes through terror. The Gothic heroine goes through terror because it is what transports her to adulthood. The sublime experience works like a Bildungsroman. It's what takes you from child to adult in a lot of these Gothic novels. Victor's failure to see what Clerval sees, to see what Walton sees, to see what the creature sees, is kind of this kind of notion that he is playing God, because he doesn't have that respect. He is unable to be moved by the scene, and therefore he's unable to really understand what it means. And a Victor who could look at a scene and be moved by it would be a Victor who then understands his responsibility to the creature as creator. So this is a really, really crucial thing in this novel, because the sublime figures so heavily and Victor fails to comprehend it. Now, what's interesting is the sublime is often not a good thing. Gothic villains are sublime. They are terrible and powerful, but also, engaging and compelling. So what we would now maybe call the Byronic hero can be sublime. Dracula can be sublime. There are moments where Dracula is sublime and the castle is sublime. Victor is never as an individual sublime, nor is he conscious or sensitive to the sublime. And it's kind of like that is what we would almost now think of as the lack of ethics. He pursues science not for the betterment, but for himself. It's that demonstration that he is purely moved by arrogant terms. And I think that's kind of why we have that scene, is that if he was a true Gothic hero, he would be transformed by that experience. But he isn't. And at the same time that this novel is being written, Austen is poking fun at the same thing. In Northanger Abbey, Catherine goes for a walk with the Tilneys, with Eleanor and Henry. And someone just mentioned Ben Barnes' Shadow and Bone. Yes, he is sublime. That is exactly what I'm talking about. That is exactly what I'm talking about.
Sublime in everything he does.
So sublime. The Darkling is sublime.
Shadow and Bone.
Anyway.
Wow, my kids are going to be super pumped that has actually made the talk this week. So
talk to me about Shadow and Bone. I was so excited. I watched it all in one day.
That's what my whole family did. Well, except for me. I was busy doing work, and they all did a marathon last Saturday and watched the whole thing. Even the older girls who don't live here anymore, they all watched it.
Yeah. Oh my God, it was great.
Commented during the whole thing. Yeah.
But Catherine goes for this walk, and Henry and Eleanor are looking at this scene outside Bath, and I know the scene that they're looking at. It is really beautiful. And they kind of, they use it as a retrospective. They use that scene to think about, we know later that Eleanor is thinking about her fiance, who she wants to be her fiance. We know, and they use this moment to kind of consider, and Catherine doesn't get it. She's kind of like, yeah, you're right. Yeah, it is really pretty. She doesn't get it. So it's really interesting to me that Austen and Shelley are doing the same thing at the same time, differently, but kind of with the same thing. The sublime is being used to demonstrate someone's lack or someone's inability to understand. And I think whereas it's very affectionate poking fun with Catherine, with Shelley, it's a huge critique. This is someone who is supposed to be this intelligent figure, and he is unable to appreciate the sublime, and therefore he will always be monstrous as a creator because he does not have that ability to be terrified. And that means that he fundamentally is never going to be able to be a respectful scientist or a good scientist, because he has the wrong mindset. It's not that he isn't intelligent enough or whatever, it's that he's almost like blocked off from it. And I think that's why that scene exists, and that's kind of how the sublime functions in this novel.
Thank you. That was absolutely great. I wanted to hit, I don't know if you saw, I just actually kicked my whole bottle of champagne. So I have to,
Cheers, Ed.
I have to hit some other questions here before we end today. I wanted to know,
so that I won't harp on the Arctic too much, but I will say there is that parallel with Walton and Victor, and the Arctic is also one of the most sublime things out there. And Walton kind of gives lip service to the idea that what he's doing is, he wants to be a benefactor of the human race. He wants to but it's unclear how going to the North Pole as he's planning to would be beneficial to the human race, as opposed to just getting a bunch of people killed. So it's almost that same kind of ethical, moral, metaphysical, religious failure all in one. So that's I will stop talking about the Arctic now.
I like the comment from Elizabeth Fuller here in the chat, our librarian at the Rosenbach. She wrote, the Arctic was the 19th century's outer space. So
it was.
Yes.
And Anna, talk to me later about Shadow and Bone, and I'll tell you why it's good.
Okay. I will message you, and you can indoctrinate me.
Good. All righty. So any other questions between you two? Because I want to hit, there's a bunch of questions in Q&A, and I'm going to do them rapid fire. But if you guys have any questions for each other first, I want to hit one of those. Mary, Dan, Lauren.
I feel like I don't want to take questions away from the audience. Like, they're here for a reason. So I'm not going to be selfish.
Okay, good. Let's hit these. Well, I'm gonna hit these, and I'm gonna hit one person for each one of them. Maxwell asks, has anybody read Frankenstein in Baghdad? Who's the author of that? Ahmed Sadawi, Frankenstein in Baghdad. Anybody?
It's on my shelf. But
yeah, and it's one of the books I thought I would get to now. This great kind of updating of Frankenstein in our contemporary culture and the wars that have gone on in the Middle East. I absolutely want to read that, but no, I haven't gotten to it yet. But it is
classic academic. I've heard 3 really great keynotes about it, and I haven't yet.
Yeah, so
it's a war novel, Lauren. What are you waiting?
Yeah, where
I know, I need to read it.
Lockie has a question.
Not to get too in my next project.
Lockie has a question here that I'm going to answer real quickly. He says, and it's it's very interesting here. Lockie says, I've never heard this novel Frankenstein discussed as a directional novel. But it's very much what it is. A directional novel features a powerful design to the story that pulls the reader along for the ride. Examples of directional novels include Grapes of Wrath, Huckleberry Finn, Lonesome Dove. He says, any thoughts about the myth of going directionally north, which implies a search for truth, heaven, a perfect ranch, maybe in Lonesome Dove, a land of people who are better than we are, elves, Santa, that kind of thing. I love the idea of that. And one of the things that I find most fascinating about Frankenstein is that how, especially as a horror novel, it works against that in a sense, in that most horror happens in secluded places or enclosed environments. And Frankenstein, for Mary Shelley, she sets it in a universal place. It's set all through Europe, Switzerland, Germany, France, England, Scotland, Ireland, as well as Russia and the Arctic. And not visited, but even discussed in the novel, are the Americas, both North and South, also Turkey and the Middle East. Mary Shelley goes out of her way to bring the entire world into her novel. And I find that very fascinating. And I find that to really work against what usually happens in horror stories as this is, you know, a seminal horror story, at least for our modern contemporary age. The directional part of it, I think, really keys into a lot of the thought at the time about the Arctic, and as Elizabeth Fuller said, it's a place, you know, it's outer space for people in the 19th century and the 18th century. I think that's very true, but I think Mary Shelley works against that in this novel, in a sense that she's trying to take something that is usually contained and almost and frequently worlds in a novel are very contained into a small space, and she wants to universalize it and bring everyone in. And I think that helps, you know, us, so many people identify with this novel, and it makes it a bigger thing than would normally happen in a novel of her time.
It's interesting because the next kind of science fiction, or one of the next science fiction authors, is Jules Verne. He would start writing about, 40 years after Mary Shelley, and his novels are also very international. Like, they kind of, the main action usually takes place in this marvelous machine that is a little microcosm, but this marvelous machine affects the entire world. And news of it spreads across the entire world. And at that point, you had, the transatlantic telegraph cable, you had all of these communication technologies. So it literally, like, if you read most of his major novels, it literally encompasses the entire globe through both physical movement, but also through communication technologies.
Yes. Next question. I'm going to save this, what Mary Shelley wanted us to learn for the last question, and we'll hit everyone real quickly on that. Brian asks, can anyone make the case that Victor is the good guy and the creature is in the wrong? Nobody's going to make that case?
Nope, not doing it.
Les Klinger tried to make the case last week, and I still do feel like early readers of this novel, Mary Shelley, were really, and Mary Shelley herself was really trying to paint Victor as this kind of, Byronic Gothic hero that absolutely has his shortcomings and has this kind of tragic fall, but we should feel for him. And I don't think anybody ever does even if that's the case with early readers, it doesn't happen anymore. I think I just dumped the question that I wanted to. Oh, okay, that's okay. Maxwell asks if I wonder if Frankenstein and Medea have been compared. Anybody? Scholars? Anybody know that? Have you ever read anything about Frankenstein and Medea? Which
version of Medea? Yeah, you mean the general myth, or
and Medea is the mother that murders all her children. It's I can't. Is it Sophocles who wrote Medea?
Well, I mean, the thing with antiquity is that you kind of have all of these myths, and then you have a bunch of different classical authors rewriting the same story, and then you end up with multiple versions. And then you have the French playwrights in the 17th century, they would only ever take from classical antiquity, so you get like 20 more versions. I think either Haïtien or Corneille wrote a version of Medea in French in the 17th century. But I'm gonna assume you mean sort of the general myth rather than a specific story. I think that it's I haven't read any comparison, like I have not read any scholarship on that. I think if I were to, it would probably center around the question of fate and destiny, because Medea sort of she really pulls a short straw, and then she's sort of like cursed with insanity and she has no control over her actions, and it's really just sort of again a tragedy in a classical sense, because there's kind of it goes beyond personal responsibility, whereas I think Frankenstein is a text hugely about personal responsibility.
Dan, there's a specific question for you. Oh, did you have something to add to that, Lauren?
No, I was just gonna say, I think comparing it is unfair to Medea.
There you go.
Well, and I think in the framework of the question as asked, and I might be wrong about this, but it seems as though, to my estimation, it makes Jason Victor Frankenstein, and it frames Medea as the Avenger who destroys the things that Jason might love in order to exact revenge upon him. But I think that's about as far as likening the two stories could go. I mean, I'm sure there are other, if you wanted to write a scholarly paper, you can chase whatever threads that you would like to, but I feel like that is kind of where we're headed. But I think that's where you run aground.
Good answer. Dan, there's a quick question for you then. What's your favorite Frankenstein piece in your collection?
In my collection? See, this is so terrible. I've got a signed letter from Peter Cushing that was an answer to one of the first fan letters that I ever wrote. I have a signed photograph of Boris Karloff that was given to me when I got out of grad school. I own Peter Cushing's hat, his personal hat that was in a film or two.
And you had a necklace that we forgot to mention you were wearing during the
I've worn it a couple of times. I have a necklace that belonged to Vincent Price that was sold to me by his daughter.
I should have asked you to wear that today. Sorry.
I don't know what to tell you. I think probably those are, they're not specific, Frankenstein posters necessarily. I have very many of those that I like. But I think in terms of favorites, I like the things that are attached to the specific people because I have such admiration for the people who made those things. And Karloff, of course, set me on my journey. But looking back, I have such affection for Peter Cushing. An impossibly fine actor. A startlingly fine actor who was relegated to these secondary pictures, if you will, mostly because I came to discover recently he was a bit of a hound and slept his way around the United Kingdom community and including David Lee.
So ironic.
Yeah, stopped him from ascending the ranks. He became an international film star. He's doing just fine.
Yes.
Dan, we have a few votes in the chat for you to give a virtual tour of your collection.
There you go.
I would love to. The trick is I'm currently in California and the bulk, if not the entirety of my collection is back in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. Yeah. That said, Ed, if you ever want to like piggyback on some Frankensteinian stuff when I'm back that way, I will be happy to lead. I mean, I have people that are close to me that are like fans of horror films, and you start to like unfold all the stuff that I own, and they can't handle it. It's too much.
I can handle it. Let me tell you.
I've heard it said before.
Dude, I work at the Rosenbach, so like I pull off copies of been handled and manuscripts and all those kind of stuff. Believe me, I can handle it. Adam asked a quick question about the Bronte materials. Were they collected? The Bronte materials we have, were they collected by Dr. Rosenbach or obtained later? They were actually obtained by Dr. Rosenbach. So as far as I know, I mean, Elizabeth, our librarian, is in the chat. If she throws in Ed, that's not true, I will happily correct that right now. But I'm pretty certain that he bought those items. Does any one of you guys have any Frankenstein guilty pleasures? Maxwell asks. I have to preface that right off the bat too, saying that like I don't believe in guilty pleasures. I believe in the pleasures that I have in life are completely worth having because they give me pleasure. Like if I said like I really enjoyed watching Frankenhooker, which is absolutely fun film to watch. I don't find any guilt in watching that just because it's like this crass B kind of movie that can be completely enjoyable, and that's just what it is, and I enjoy that. Anybody have a guilty pleasure or anything like that?
I'm an academic, so it's literally my job to like read this book. So I don't think I can call it a guilty pleasure when it's my job.
I don't think I have a guilty pleasure.
Sharon asked a question earlier. Go ahead. Did you have more to add?
No, I was going to say No, I was just trying to think of something. I know I picked Count Duckula when we did our favorite
Yeah.
Dracula things. I'm trying to think
And
if there's something like that I love.
what's fascinating is that it used to be this kind of pop culture stuff people used to call guilty pleasures, but as you guys know, now it's part of the, it's part of academia, that like we recognize now that this is worth looking at for what it says about these stories, right?
Can I just say that someone has put in the chat, I Frankenstein, and if I had to pick a guilty pleasure that isn't guilty at all, that would be mine. I Frankenstein is a terrible film. It's awful, but I love it, and I actually think it's one of the best Frankenstein adaptations if you're thinking about the novel and what the novel is trying to do, and it working as a kind of continuation. If the creature didn't die at the end, where would he be in our kind of contemporary timeline? There's angels, there's demons, there's a whole other like story.
You get the whole Paradise Lost in there because of that.
It's done. It tries so hard, and I give it all the points for like understanding the novel and for trying to do it. Fails at the execution, like I said, it's terrible, and the CGI is also awful. But I do love it. I think it's great. Yeah, that would be mine.
As we get near the end here, yes, we're approaching near the end, everyone. After 15 weeks, any moments from this series that you guys, or the better question to ask you all is, how I kind of asked Dan at the beginning about, approaching this novel after a long time, but any moments in this novel or in this, as we were doing this series, that really stood out with this book for you that maybe you hadn't noticed before? Who wants to go? I'll call on you.
I'll jump straight out the box.
You call on us one at a time.
Dan?
I think just to get things rolling, the thing that I was staggered by in re-encountering this novel is how abhorrent I found Victor to be. Because I hadn't read this novel in decades, and of course you come to it with all the different expectations of times. And when I read it, I was not a terribly sophisticated reader. He's just among the most repellent leading characters that I can think of in literature, in terms of people that we are supposed to, or arguably supposed to sympathize with. So that for me is a big takeaway from diving into this again. It's richer than I remembered. It's far more readable than I remembered. The dialogue is at times every bit as stilted as I remembered. But the fact that Victor is just so unsympathetic doesn't even begin to cover what a complete jackass he is. That for me has been the biggest takeaway from this.
Anastasia?
Yeah, I mean, the first time I read this novel, I was 19, which is, the age Victor is kind of at the start of his, let's say his like adventures. And I think, rereading this and looking back at an age when I'm not 19, and reading this text written by, a teenage girl who's surrounded by men like Victor Frankenstein, I think that was just a completely different perspective for me. And, just kind of thinking about what you're like, if you're a certain kind of person at the age of 19 and full of hubris and ambition and just this sort of a way of looking at the world where you think it's your oyster and you have no like ethical responsibilities. I think, she really captured that. But also I just, I again, as a historian, a science fiction scholar, I find all of the science stuff, like all of the references to the air pump and the electricity and galvanism, all of that really interesting, just because kind of that's what makes the novel science fiction, thinking about how the novel engages with all of this stuff going on and says, well, it's set in the present, it's according to Erasmus Darwin, all of this stuff is possible, and like you have to read this as a novel set in a contemporary period, contemporaneous to the moment of writing and the moment of reading. It's not happening. It's like magical faraway land. Like, this is the near future, and this is possible according to science as we know it, or maybe just suspend your disbelief and believe that it's possible according to science as we know it today. To me, that's so interesting.
Wonderful. All righty. Before I get to Mary, I'm going to ask you next, but before that, Elizabeth, our librarian, said that Dr. R did acquire all of our Brontes, and Lewis Carroll's copies of Jane Eyre and Villette were entered into the company's stock for sale, but the other Bronte items went right into his personal collection. So there's an answer for that. Mary, what struck you about the novel this time?
Wow, so Frankenstein has always been one of my favorite novels, and every time I read it, I'm always struck, just, I guess, by how amazing it is as a novel, and also every time I read it, just even more, how Victor is just a complete asshole. But I think what's been really great this time is all of the added like contextual information that you've all been kind of adding to that. This has been a really, like Dracula, this has been a really great experience, and I've loved like watching all the other weeks and having everyone's different perspectives, because I think there are so many different perspectives that you can have on Frankenstein, but whether that's kind of historical readings contemporaneously, or looking at the kind of legacies and the afterlives of Frankenstein through film and other kinds of media, and also other unconnected stuff that's still interesting. So yeah, like I've really enjoyed that, all of that kind of added kind of contextual information. It gives another layer of richness to what is already for me a really rich and enjoyable novel.
And imagine add 30 years to your life, and then imagine all those other times you read it, and it's crazy that it does continue. I'm in my 50s, and it still hits me, and I still see things that like I hadn't quite seen before. So that will continue as you go along. Lauren?
Yeah, I think, like Mary said, it's so wonderful to be able to read and talk, as an academic. This is what you kind of wish for. We often only get a week, maybe 2 weeks on these texts with our students, and there's so much you want to say and so much you want to dig into, and to be able, and even at conferences, you listen to these great papers, but they're often only 20 minutes long, and to be able to take it chapter by chapter and to have so many different perspectives, it just brings it to life so beautifully. And I think for me that has been really valuable. I didn't read this novel until I was 20. I read it for the first time on a Gothic Origins module as an undergraduate, and I was really surprised by it, because my cultural understanding of Frankenstein was so different to what the novel is. Like, I know that's the case for so many of us, but really and truly, I was so shocked when I started reading it that it wasn't what I thought it was going to be, and it's ever since then been a really wonderful experience, because it fascinates me how it's grown and how it develops, but also because the first time you read it, you're like, oh, okay. And then you read it again with a little bit more insight. And every time you read it, I feel like it becomes more poignant, particularly at the moment when we're thinking so crucially about ethics and creation and what we put out into the world, and what the consequences of those actions are, and the unforeseen consequences of our actions. And yes, of course, for me, like in the last couple of years, I've been reading this as a post-war novel, and I'm desperate to be able to write about it properly as a post-war novel. But as scholars, we think more about the wider context, and the fact that Frankenstein continually can be used in that way, in that kind of not heavy-handed, but very personal and enlightening didactic fashion. I just think it's just such a beautiful testament to the text that we can do this with it. You know, I would have always worried that we'd get to like week 5 and be like, well,
No way.
what do we
Yeah.
like? But there's the say about it, and I think it's just it's a beautiful not just testament but kind of tribute to Shelley, that we're able to do this, that the novel sustains this level of analysis and chat, because I think Mary and Anna will probably agree with me this, when you're teaching a text that is important but isn't necessarily good, sometimes even an hour lecture can be painful to get through and painful to get students to engage with or readers to engage with. And I think this just demonstrates how good this is as a novel to read for fun and a novel to read to enjoy.
Good. Over 30 hours of it. Let's hope we're able to do that for people.
Yeah.
Sharon had asked a question very early on that, what do you think Mary Shelley wanted? Is there a lesson Mary Shelley wanted people to her readers to come away with this novel? And I always kind of, get a little, I pull back from those kind of questions because I don't think literary works are necessarily like, how we picture like a children's story, like what's the lesson to be learned from this? But monster stories always have a kind of warning, and even the word monster itself, it's, the monstrare root, to warn, to show, a monere, to warn, monstrare, to show, and that monster stories do always have this kind of warning for us. And I think that's there in this text. Either it's the warning, the general popular warning that, we shouldn't, test the bounds of our knowledge or go against God, and that kind of thing is there. But also, I think when you read, especially the 1818 novel, the warnings that you should take care of your familial responsibilities and things that you create or do, you should always make sure that you take care of those. I think those warnings are there in this novel, but I'll throw this out to you guys. Are there lessons or warnings in this novel that we should take away from it, or that you take away from it? Is maybe the better answer, the better question.
Oh, yeah. I hesitate sometimes to call this didactic, because to me, didacticism is a tradition that I associate with something like Robinson Crusoe.
Yeah.
And I often find didactic texts to be incredibly heavy-handed, particularly in the 18th century. Didacticism is often like literally slapping someone around the head with a book and going, be better, be good.
Yeah.
But this is, I think, a didactic novel that sparks a new tradition of didacticism because it's coming out of the Gothic. The Gothic uses allegory and the supernatural and ancient past and Europe as stand-ins to discuss very pressing, very present anxieties. And that's why, from 1790 to 1800, the Gothic texts change every 6 months in terms of what they're afraid of, because such a chaotic period of time. And I think this does have a message, but it's very much doing something that modern writers are really interested in doing. I see Atwood in Shelley and vice versa. I think Shelley is really ahead of her time here because she's trying to force introspection and retrospection, and particularly with the moralistic elements and the ending, it's not didactic in the way that it's going, this is how you behave, this is how you should take this. But it's didactic in that it's forcing discovery. The novel itself is a sublime being. The actual text is a sublime experience. I would go so far as to say that, it's forcing you to think in this way that actually in 1818 is quite radical. It's very radical to think like this. So I'd be hesitant to say this is the message or that's the message. But I do think that there is an intention here, and authorial intention is something we try not to assume, but I think there's a definite intention to force you as a reader to stop and look at the world around you and to think about your place in it and what you do. And I think for a young woman to write this after such a period of chaos to such an audience used to sentimental fiction, didactic fiction, you know, used to things like Fordyce's sermons, it's such a revolutionary text.
Yeah.
So I would maybe not say it has a message, but I would definitely say it's educational in that sense. It's about learning.
All right, the rest of you. Lauren went
Yeah.
first. She had a real high bar there. So Mary.
Sorry.
I think I agree with you, Ed. Like, I think it's always difficult to kind of infer or suggest that we can know authorial intent and whether Mary Shelley intended there to be a message or a moral or an ethical reading of this text. And I don't necessarily think that there is one, again, that either Mary Shelley intended or that we can read from it, but we can still find kinds of, you know, moral lessons or readings in that way. And I think one of them is that kind of social obligation, you know, and the importance of family and societal ties, and how that extends beyond people that look like us to the kind of the other. And I mean, I don't know if Mary Shelley intended this, but there's definitely a reading of this text in the critique of Victor, and how he's so obsessed with physical appearances to him, and also to you know, this is borne out in the de Lacy family and other people that interact with the creature, but physical appearances to him kind of align with a kind of moral degradation, which I think this novel is kind of arguing against. It's resisting that. So I think it's that kind of dual reading where social and familial ties are important, but also that we should extend that to people that don't necessarily look like or conform to our understandings of the self, physically. So that would be my answer.
Yeah,
Anastasia?
I mean, I will agree that, I mean, I don't think it has sort of like a neatly packaged, wrapped in a bow moral at the end of the story. I don't think it's that kind of didactic, but I do think it's very much a novel about personal responsibility and social connection, and those two are tied, because, you know, your personal responsibility for the things you create in whatever way, and the things you put into the world, they affect the people around you and the people closest to you most of all, but the people around you in general. So it's a meditation on the things that you owe to the people around you, and also the importance of fostering those connections, and, you know, letting people help you, and you know, make you a better person even. And I think that's, again, I'm wary of ascribing intent to somebody who's been dead for 150 years, because none of us can read her mind. But I do think that, you know, for a lot of biographical reasons that we can sort of draw from Mary Shelley's life, that sort of personal responsibility and also human connection, those were two kind of major things she would have been confronted with constantly and thinking about, and just sort of dealing with in multiple ways in her life.
Yeah. And I think romantic, you know, authors especially want us to read their minds. You know, I mean, you think of Wordsworth's Prelude and all that, like I'm giving you my mind, please read it. But you know, but again, you know, it is, is that the subtitle of the Prelude poem, I think?
Well, Wordsworth, there's this guy named Roland Barthes who would come later, who would inform you that the author is dead, and that ain't gonna happen.
No, I didn't mention Coleridge at all. I didn't mention Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner at all today, which I think I've mentioned for 14 straight weeks.
Who are you, and what have you done with Ed?
There you go. So Dan?
Just utter cruelty on your part. to make me wait until after these astounding.
I know, right?
I'm in with what little crumbs I'm able.
Well, it's like reading the novel, like this utterly, unbelievably, completely brilliant, woman reading this, not young woman writing this novel, and like, what could I possibly have to say, after you have created this brilliant work of art? So, Dan,
I think the best I can manage is. There's a degree to which it echoes what everybody has said, but it does, at least to my estimation, I might have misheard what a number of you said, but coming at it through a different lens, which is to say, none of us can presume Mary's intent. All I can say is what I took. And we have Victor, we have the creature, and we have Walton, our three kind of central storytelling figures within the context of this. And what I take from it is each of these figures is in their way completely and utterly, almost exclusively self-focused. This is what has happened to me. This is what I want to do. And how that essentially destroys not only their own lives, but the lives of the people around them, with the possible exception of Walton, only because he is willing to give up what his desires are for the betterment of the people who surround him. He does give it up to the men and say, if you want to turn around and go home, I will. Which is something that Victor and the creature never do. And yet Walton at the same time is angry about it. He's never going to be able to reconcile his quote unquote cowardice or whatever he says. But to me, what I take away from this is the fact that at some point you have to look away from yourself and your own desires and your own ambitions and look at the other people, not just family, but just, or your responsibility to society, but whatever it is just outside of your immediate self. Because the self and complete self-focus leads to myopic destruction.
I think that's a really great point. And Shelley definitely, like, if you look at Shelley's fiction after Frankenstein, it's all very interested in individually motivated people who destroy things. And like, particularly Valperga and Perkin Warbeck are both about, and even The Last Man to a certain extent. The Last Man is kind of different because it's like, you must come together as a society. Otherwise, you will literally all die in this post-apocalyptic, landscape. But yeah, like, and this is post a period of this man is a hero. This man is a hero. There's no, no mention of the hundreds of men that fight and die and the people that make the weapons and the people that kept the country going. It's all this person is exceptional. This person is brilliant. And then every single one of Shelley's novels after that completely deconstruct that notion and really tear it apart. I think that definitely, like, yes, we cannot say that was her intention, but when we look at what comes afterwards, that is 100% something that she's really keen on ripping apart and stamping on and saying, no, this is bad, stop it.
Excellent. Well done, everybody. Dan, I asked you earlier, like we were chatting before the show, anything coming up for you? We don't have anything coming up for you though, do we?
I've got the bottom of a bottle of wine coming up for me.
Well done. Cheers to that.
Yeah, no, very little, I'm afraid, at the moment. So I continue to write.
Is that a beaker glass?
It is. He drinks out of that every week. Yeah. So,
there's always something. I mean, for those of you who don't know, when the theater closed down, my job is I work for a firm ghostwriting romance novels. So every week I have some new book that I'm on the cusp of completing or getting started or getting writers on board for. So there's always something going on, but because they're ghostwriting, I'm not allowed to disclose what any of them are. So I'm sorry. I can't put up the links to the books because you're not allowed to know that I wrote them.
All righty. Anastasia, do you have something to plug here? Well, we have our Frankenstein course for the Rosenbach, which
yes, I would be thrilled to see many of you there.
I certainly hope so, that some of our audience will take that class with me and to hear you talk about Frankenstein and science. But you also have another thing coming up too, a Profs and Pints, right?
Yes. So at Profs and Pints, which is this initiative that basically brings in academics to give talks about their work to, a non-academic audience. So on May 16th, which is a Sunday, so if you're wondering what to do with your Sundays, I have a solution for at least one Sunday for you. May 16th, I'll be giving a talk called Our Lives in a Science Fiction World, which is, essentially about how science fiction intersects with our lives, how it's, shapes our perceptions of science and technology, how it helps us imagine and build new futures. So the way I summarize it to people is, if you're interested in what the hell is it that I do with all of my time, and when I say I research science fiction, what is it that I do? Well, this is what I do. Come find out and hear me talk about it for a good 40 minutes, which is the length of a job talk.
There you go.
It's longer than an academic paper at a conference. So you'll be getting twice as much as you get at a conference.
That link is in our chat, and we'll put that on the Facebook group as well. The Ghoul Guides have something coming up. We have a date maybe that might coincide here with Anastasia's. Maybe the time won't exactly. Go ahead. What do you guys have coming up?
So we are we're taking a short break, but we are hoping to start making content again. And we have been talking about doing a new show that we are calling Tea and Answers. So we will be doing a live stream on YouTube, doing a Ghoul Guides Q&A. So we decided that because we had so many great questions and there was so much that we know that people were still asking about, and I know you guys always have fantastic questions, so we thought, why not do a sort of Frankenstein, Dracula, all around Gothic for our first Q&A. So we will be kind of setting the details in stone going forwards, but we were thinking Sunday the 16th might be a good date to launch that. So we will be getting the specifics in place, remembering how to stream to YouTube. We did it once about a year ago, so we need to remember how to do that. But we will be taking questions in.
So I've done a lot of streaming. I'm happy. Yeah. I'm happy to consult with you.
Yeah, we'll be taking questions in advance. So you can either ask questions on our YouTube. So there's a place on YouTube where you can send us stuff directly. You can email it to us, but also I will be posting about it in the Sundays with Frankenstein and the Sundays with Dracula Facebook. So you can submit any questions that you want us to maybe answer on the show. And YouTube does have a chat content, so we can still have that great chat community. Mary and I will be ever so slightly delayed, but we can still see your comments. So good. I will try and have screens going at the same time so that I can keep track of the chat while we're doing it.
Let's work that out so we can do a time difference where there's, Anastasia's Props and Pines will not be the same time as Tina.
Mine is in the evening. It's at about 7 p.m. Eastern time, which I think Lauren and Mary will probably be asleep by then. So yeah, I doubt we will overlap in time.
So we should be good. So,
but also Props and Pints, it is recorded. So if you can't make it for whatever reason, if you buy the ticket, you can go back and listen to it afterwards.
That was going to be my question, Anna, was can we watch it when we wake up the next day?
Absolutely. Yeah, it will stay on there for all of posterity. And you can watch it whenever, as many times as you want.
Good. Yeah. And I should say there's a charge for that Props and Pines, but what I love about it is that Anastasia gets a cut of that. So I'm always a fan of, paying the creator, paying the artist, paying the professor, so to do these kinds of things. So I'm so happy that they do that. And you're supporting Anastasia.
Yeah, which I very much appreciate as an academic. So thank you to everyone who has bought a ticket already, or who is planning to.
And Mary and Lauren, we don't have an announcement to make just because the three of us haven't finished out the details yet. But we can say that we're planning on the two of you doing a Gothic course for the Rosenbach, a Gothic literature course in which you tackle things like Anne Radcliffe and these other great Gothic works. And we hope to have info about that posted soon. Right,
yeah,
guys?
We are both very excited about that. So
good.
Yeah.
So yeah. I'm excited about that. We've all agreed that we're going to do that. We just haven't worked out those details yet. So you guys will I'm sure plenty of people will love to take a course, as I will. I haven't read all of Radcliffe's work, so I've actually never read the Italian, so there's the one. Like I'm saying,
The Italian is
yeah.
my favorite Radcliffe novel.
Good. So do the Italian in this course. I'll say that and see if you will. And
we'll do that, and we can talk about evil monks. Yeah.
Good. Oh yes, I love talking about evil monks. So. Well, we've gone a half hour over today, as I figured we would. I wasn't going to put any stop on the final after show. Franken readers, thank you all for tuning in today. Of course, we'll post this recording on our website, along with my Margaret W. Seville champagne cocktail recipe. And if you're watching the video, thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in that way, that you couldn't tune in live, but you watched the video. So if that's how you're watching this, thank you very much. I want to thank everyone who has joined the Rosenbach as a member over the last few months. We've had over 70 people join since this show began, and I want to thank you all for doing that. We had 4 more this week. Michael from Southampton, Christine from Rutledge, PA, both joined at the Mary Shelley level. James from Maplewood joined at the Abigail Adams level, and Bob and Kitty from Haverford, who have written me emails, and I love having them watch the show, and the questions and the comments that they've made. They joined at the Phyllis Wheatley level. Thank you all for watching and for joining the Rosenbach. Your support helps the Rosenbach continue to create programs like the one we're doing right now, and also to care for our collections. And a few thank yous before I get into my final comments. I want to thank Dave Gustin, who did a great Frankenstein talk for us as a special program. I want to thank Jen Summerfield and Josh Hitchens for the Frankenstein films that they made. And if people haven't seen those, they were completely astoundingly brilliant performances that they both did. Jen Summerfield as Mary Shelley and Josh doing his solo Frankenstein piece. Were really brilliant. Thanks to Les Klinger, author of the Annotated Frankenstein, for appearing last week, and he was also on the Franken Cocktails show we did, the cocktail party that we had. Thanks to Tucker Christine, who was here earlier, for the music for this. Thanks, Tucker. I love the music, and I look forward to things we could do in the future. Thanks to Sophie H. Pettit, the daughter of Edward G. Pettit, who did the productions, who did the credits production for these for this run of the show. That was very appreciative, and of course my wife Kate and Sophie and Lulu for reading along and watching every week. That is, something that was really nice for me to be able to do, not to talk to you guys, the co-hosts and the audience with the show, but I got to talk with my family about this novel and really go through it that way. And that's been a unique and enjoyable experience for me. Thanks to Tamworth Distilling and Art in the Age for the wonderful cocktails I had for 14 straight weeks. My liver thanks you. I have been. It was certainly so much nicer than Dracula when I was buying all the booze myself, to have Tamworth and Art in the Age supply that for me. And we got some great cocktails out of that. Thanks to the staff at the Rosenbach who worked behind the scenes to make this show possible. You all see me and it's like Ed is the Rosenbach, and there's a whole team at the Rosenbach who does marketing and social media and development, and our chat Igors, who are always on the show, are from the Rosenbach. Andrew and Christina have done some shows, but it's mostly been Brianna every week for the run of this. Thank you so much, Brianna, and our other chat Igors who have done this. I couldn't do this show without you guys. But most of all, thanks to our audience. Thank you all for going on another biblio adventure with me. Last year, when we began our Dracula series, many of us, we'd been home for a couple of months, and the way we were able to connect with each other over a book for an extended period of time felt really good. It gave us this sense of community, and so many of you have been with me through not just Dracula, but also now Frankenstein, and I hope you'll come with me for Jane Eyre too. I'm so grateful for your time. and I don't know about you, but I, we spent more than 15 weeks. We spent 15 weeks talking about all Frankenstein. I could have gone a lot more. And part of me wishes that we had, but especially considering how tumultuously this year began, especially here in America. Your messages to me via email and on the Facebook group page have really lifted me, and I hope this show did the same for you, along with learning about what I think is one of the great novels. This gathering together every week has fostered this biblio community, a biblio family, we could call it. And that's due to our dedicated audience. So I hope the show has provided you with some respite, some needed respite from the world. And of course, I also hope it was fun, as fun for you as it was for me. And a final thank you to Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Thank you for your life and for your books. I think about when Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, the couple of years she had just been through, eloping with Percy, the estrangement with her father, losing her first child, then losing her stepsister Fanny to suicide, and then the more tumultuous years that followed after the publication of the book, including the death of her husband Percy. Out of the brilliant mind of this extraordinary woman came this book, Frankenstein, that not only encapsulates so many ideas of her time, but does so in a way that still speaks to us, that still resonates with how we relate to our world and with one another. I mean, this is a mark of great literature when a book continues to speak to people over the centuries. Frankenstein is a novel about monsters, but it's also a novel about science and religion and myth. It's a novel about birth, education, and death. It's a novel about family and responsibility. Frankenstein is also genre fiction. It's a science fiction novel. It's a Gothic novel. It's a commentary on Paradise Lost. It's a commentary on the French Revolution. It's a commentary on romantic ideology. Sometimes it's just a travel book. Frankenstein is a novel about how we relate to the natural world. And like a true monster story, Mary touched on this earlier, it's a novel about otherness, and it's how that otherness separates people and the consequences of separation. Mary Shelley, I think, unlike any author before her, created a monster story in which we sympathize with the monster, with the creature, in which we question the monstrosity of a being, in which we curse the separateness that we create. And so, Franken readers, fellow wandering spirits, thank you all for being on this biblio venture with me. I'll see you all again on the other side with Jane Eyre. Dan, Anastasia, Mary, Lauren, thanks, guys. This has been really great.
Thank you, Ed. And those are just perfect words to end on. So thank you for sending us off so eloquently.
Thank you for being so great throughout. You are really a fantastic host. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I will see you all in July for Sundays with Jane Eyre. Will, of course, once again be played out in our final credits with Tucker Christine's pleated gazelle song, It's Alive. Farewell, wandering spirits, and remember, you have hope and the world before you. Cheers, everyone. Thank you.
yourself kind of